Unfair judge smirks at a black woman. Regrets it when she calls the Supreme Court. Amid a morning haze that blanketed the city of Brookside, Alicia Dunn stepped off a city bus in front of the courthouse. The air smelled faintly of last night's rain, a damp coolness lingering on the pavement. She clutched a worn leather briefcase, the strap straining against her shoulder, and smoothed her simple gray blazer as she walked. She wasn't a lawyer, but she carried herself with a calm, purposeful manner, as though each step had significance. At just past 8 a.m., the courthouse steps were already dotted with people, some flipping through documents, others pacing with nervous energy, awaiting their hearings. Alicia paused at the top of the stairs, letting out a measured breath, bracing herself for what lay ahead. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving the corridors a sterile glow. A security checkpoint stood at the main entrance, manned by a bored-looking officer scanning bags. Alicia placed her briefcase on the belt, stepping through the metal detector. The guard nodded politely, returning her property. She offered a muted smile in return. Past the checkpoint, the hall branched into multiple directions: civil court, criminal court, family court. She veered left, heading for courtroom 2B, a place she'd grown distressingly familiar with over the last 2 months. A matter she once believed could be resolved with a single hearing had ballooned into repeated appearances, all thanks to the judge assigned, Judge Jeremy Calloway. Judge Calloway, by reputation, was known for an aloof manner, some might say arrogant. He had an old-fashioned formality that borderlined on condescension. For reasons Alicia had yet to grasp, he'd seemed determined to complicate her case from day one, cutting her off in mid-explanation, dismissing her evidence with bored shrugs, letting out exasperated sighs whenever she tried to clarify. Alicia, a black woman in her early 30s, with a gentle but firm resolve, felt the subtle weight of prejudice creeping into the judge's tone. She never wanted to leap to that conclusion without evidence, but the pattern of his interactions, plus the occasional smirk whenever she spoke, made it hard to ignore. She confided in a friend that she suspected unconscious bias at best, outright discrimination at worst. Regardless, she'd been determined to see this case through. The case itself was mundane on the surface. Alicia, caretaker to her elderly mother, was contesting a property issue. Her mother's longtime caretaker agreement had been unilaterally modified by an unscrupulous cousin who claimed rights to the mother's small property. Alicia had discovered financial irregularities. She filed for an injunction, wanting to protect her mother's home. But each hearing, the cousin's attorney, an overconfident man named Ellis, painted Alicia as either incompetent or overly emotional. Judge Calloway took Ellis's word at face value, rarely allowing Alicia to fully speak. The hearing had dragged on for weeks, with the judge ordering more and more paperwork, never giving Alicia a fair chance to present her thorough evidence. The entire process felt like treading water in a sea of hostility. At precisely 8:30, Alicia pushed open the doors to courtroom 2B, stepping into a large, wood-paneled space. Rows of benches faced a raised bench for the judge. The air was tense with the hush of litigants. A clerk typed methodically, and near the front, Ellis and the cousin sat with smug confidence. Alicia joined her seat at the petitioner's side, quietly taking out files from her briefcase. She glanced around, no sign of the judge yet. The bailiff, a tall woman with a stern face, indicated the judge would be arriving shortly. Alicia tried to calm her nerves, smoothing her blouse, flipping open the thick folder containing fresh evidence. She'd found bank statements proving the cousin withdrew funds inappropriately, plus testimonies from neighbors attesting to Alicia's rightful caretaker role. She hoped, fervently, that this hearing might settle it, or at least let her speak. She refused to cower before the sneers of Ellis or the cousin. Moments later, a side door opened. Judge Calloway entered, wearing a charcoal robe and an air of perfunctory annoyance. He nodded to the bailiff, who intoned, "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Jeremy Calloway presiding." Everyone stood. The judge took his seat, flipping through papers. "Be seated," he muttered. He scanned the docket, the usual dryness in his voice. "All right, first matter. Dunn versus Harper regarding caretaker property rights. Parties present. Alicia Rose, a polite, "Good morning, Your Honor, I'm Alicia Dunn." On the other side, Ellis Rose with a flourish, Ellis Thorne representing Ms. Harper. The cousin, a middle-aged woman in a crisp business suit, gave a faint wave. The judge nodded, looking bored already. "We were here last time to see if Ms. Dunn had new evidence." "Let's keep it brief," he said, drumming his fingers on the bench. Alicia inhaled. "Your Honor, I have additional documents showing repeated unauthorized withdrawals from my mother's account by Ms. Harper. This affects the caretaker agreement. I believe." She was cut off as the judge waved a hand. Yes, we've heard about alleged withdrawals, Ms. Dunn. Do you have anything that definitively proves wrongdoing?" She tried again. "Yes, sir, these statements tie the dates and amounts to Ms. Harper's visits. Also, I have a neighbor's affidavit that Ms. Harper rarely provided actual caretaker services. My mother is left alone for days." She stepped forward to hand the documents to the clerk. The judge sighed, arching a brow at Ellis. "Mr. Thorne, your response?" Ellis put on a condescending smile. "Your Honor, these so-called statements merely show routine transactions. Ms. Harper was assisting with grocery shopping and household bills. Ms. Dunn is spinning an emotional tale, as usual, offering no real proof. The caretaker agreement stands. Ms. Dunn just wants control." A flicker of impatience crossed the judge's face. He smirked slightly, turning to Alicia. "Seems you still lack firm evidence of fraud. Ms. Harper had authority as caretaker?" "Yes." Alicia felt her temper spike. "No, the authority was conditional, but she exploited it. She's harming my mother's welfare." The judge let out an audible sigh. "Ms. Dunn, let's not get dramatic. If you want to pursue a fraud claim, you should have filed in the appropriate civil division. Right now, we're dealing with caretaker arrangement compliance. I see no immediate cause to revoke Ms. Harper's caretaker role." Alicia's chest tightened. He was brushing her off again, barely skimming the new documents. She tried once more, but these documents show how. He cut her off with a cold laugh, glancing at the gallery as though seeking an audience's agreement. "Ms. Dunn, you have a habit of repetitive claims. This is the third hearing. And still no conclusive proof? I suspect you're being over-emotional. Maybe you don't like Ms. Harper. Perhaps you resent not being chosen caretaker. This court can't indulge personal grudges. Enough." The emphasis stung with finality. A flush crept up Alicia's neck. Her heart hammered, a swirl of humiliation flooding her chest. She parted her lips, unsure how to respond, but the judge's glare said he'd hear no more. Then he smirked. It was subtle, but it was there, a mocking little curve of his mouth that said, "You lose again, Ms. Dunn." Rage and despair warred within Alicia. She was a law-abiding citizen trying to protect her mother, who had mild dementia. The cousin had manipulated everything, yet the judge believed the cousin's side with no empathy. Was it because Alicia was black? Because she lacked fancy attorneys? Or just the judge's prejudice? She recalled that at the first hearing, he made a remark about these so-called caretaker disputes. She knew then he was predisposed against her, but seeing him smirk hammered home the blatant disrespect. Alicia felt tears sting her eyes. She had to do something radical. In a trembling voice, she said, "Your Honor, I object to the court's dismissal. I request an immediate evidentiary hearing under the elder abuse statutes. This matter is urgent. My mother's life is impacted." The judge rolled his eyes. Objection overruled. The caretaker arrangement stands. Ms. Harper remains caretaker. Ms. Dunn, if you want further recourse, file a separate civil suit with a different judge. The court's decision is final here. We're done. He rapped the gavel. Alicia's heart sank. The bailiff signaled that the next case was to commence. Ellis, the cousin's lawyer, smirked with triumph. Ms. Harper gave Alicia a condescending glance. The judge turned away, effectively dismissing Alicia's pleas as worthless. Her limbs felt heavy as she gathered her papers. She mumbled, "This isn't over," under her breath, though it felt hollow. She stepped from the courtroom, tears threatening. Outside in the corridor, her friend Amanda, who'd come as moral support, rushed up. How'd it go? Alicia's face told the story. He shot me down again, she whispered. He smirked at me like I was trash. Amanda placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. That's outrageous. He can't keep ignoring evidence. What will you do? Alicia looked at the floor, numb. I need to escalate. I can't let this stand. And so began Alicia's quest for justice beyond the local courthouse. She started with the standard appeals process, but each attorney she approached demanded high fees, uncertain they could help. The legal system was labyrinthine. Meanwhile, Ms. Harper continued controlling her mother's finances, apparently unmonitored. Alicia grew desperate. Then a faint memory flickered. Years ago, Alicia had interned at a civil rights organization in D.C. She remembered meeting a staff member who later clerked for a Supreme Court justice. The memory seemed far-fetched, calling the Supreme Court about a caretaker case, but Alicia felt she had no other choice. The local system was failing her. Perhaps a constitutional or civil rights angle existed if the judge's prejudice could be proven. With trembling resolve, Alicia contacted that old acquaintance, Carla, now a mid-level clerk in the Supreme Court's administrative offices. Alicia laid out the situation in an emotional phone call. She was being systematically dismissed by a judge who showed signs of bias. Carla was sympathetic, though cautious. The Supreme Court typically handles broad constitutional issues, not day-to-day caretaker disputes. But Carla said she might connect Alicia with a civil rights group that sometimes filed briefs on judicial misconduct or bias. Alicia seized that lead. Carla gave her some phone numbers. In the ensuing weeks, Alicia spoke with a civil rights attorney named Norman Green, who specialized in cases of alleged judicial discrimination. Green listened carefully, then offered some blunt truths. We can't just call the Supreme Court and fix this. But if we gather enough evidence that this judge is repeatedly biased, or that he violated your due process rights by ignoring evidence, we could approach a federal court or state Supreme Court to intervene. Possibly even a complaint to the Judicial Conduct Commission. Alicia realized it would be a long shot, but nodded. She provided recordings, transcripts, witness statements from earlier hearings. Green found it compelling, especially the judge's repeated dismissals, the lack of a hearing on evidence, the smirks. He told Alicia, "We might be able to escalate quickly if we show irreparable harm to your mother. Let's try an emergency petition." So they filed an emergency petition to the state appellate court, citing judicial misconduct and the urgent nature of elder care. They also threatened to involve federal civil rights agencies if necessary. Alicia's mother's condition had deteriorated. Ms. Harper had begun selling personal items from the home. Green demanded a stay on Harper's caretaker authority until an impartial hearing could occur. Word of this petition circulated among the local legal community, raising eyebrows. Usually, such direct accusations of bias are rare and risky, but Alicia pressed on, unwavering. Meanwhile, Judge Calloway got wind of the petition. Initially, he scoffed, telling colleagues Alicia had no chance. But as the appellate court asked for a response, it signaled they might consider her claims. The local press caught wind of the phrase, possible racial bias. The judge's associates grew uneasy. He might face public scrutiny if the appellate court found grounds for an investigation. Tension built in the courthouse. Rumors even suggested Alicia had a line to the Supreme Court. Some found that laughable. Others, hearing about Carla's role, believed it. The judge's bravado began to crack. He never imagined that a single black woman he'd smirked at could mount such a strong pushback. Finally, a letter arrived from the state appellate judge, ordering a hearing on the matter of judicial fairness in Alicia's case. They demanded Judge Calloway appear to explain his reasoning for dismissing evidence. Ms. Harper's caretaker status was temporarily suspended pending the outcome. Alicia felt a surge of relief. Her mother's home was safe from immediate exploitation. Ms. Harper raged, calling Alicia a troublemaker, but it didn't matter. The appellate hearing was scheduled in the state capitol, 2 hours away. Alicia and her attorney, Green, prepared thoroughly. Meanwhile, media curiosity soared. A local judge being hauled to an appellate hearing for possible bias was sensational. Many wondered if the smirk and dismissive attitude would be hammered by higher courts. The day of the appellate hearing arrived. The corridor outside the hearing room was thick with tension, lawyers huddling, reporters milling about. Alicia wore a simple but elegant navy suit, her hair in neat braids. Green carried a briefcase stuffed with transcripts. Ms. Harper had retained Ellis, who now seemed out of his depth. Judge Calloway arrived with an official counsel representing the judicial branch, wearing an expression of forced confidence. He spotted Alicia, gave a tight-lipped nod, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. The hearing room was smaller than a trial court, with 3 appellate judges seated at a long bench. They were stern-faced, ready to hear arguments. Green opened by summarizing the timeline, stressing how Alicia's attempts to present evidence were repeatedly shut down, culminating in the judge's mocking remarks. He read excerpts from transcripts, the judges cutting off Alicia mid-sentence, his refusal to examine crucial documents, that final smirk-laden ruling. The appellate judges listened intently. Then Ms. Harper's attorney tried, claiming the judge was just maintaining order, that Alicia's evidence was insufficient. Finally, the Judicial Counsel for Judge Calloway argued that the judge was within discretion to rule swiftly, and suggestions of racism were unsubstantiated. But then Green produced a bombshell, an affidavit from a courthouse staffer who'd overheard the judge making disparaging remarks about Alicia's type and how they always cry wolf. The staffer remained anonymous to avoid workplace retaliation, but the appellate panel read the affidavit gravely. One judge frowned, asking the counsel, "Is the judge prepared to refute these claims?" The counsel could only protest that these statements were hearsay, but it painted a damning picture. The final blow came when Green revealed that Alicia had indeed used her network to contact a Supreme Court clerk, who had guided them on filing a potential complaint to the U.S. Department of Justice if the state courts failed to address potential civil rights violations. The prospect that the Supreme Court or federal authorities might examine the case alarmed the appellate judges, who prided themselves on handling matters internally. They eyed the judges' counsel with a mix of caution and censure, implying that if they found evidence of bias, they'd have no qualms referring it upward. After an intense half-day hearing, the appellate panel adjourned to deliberate. Tension in the hallway soared. Judge Calloway looked pale, pacing near the vending machines with his counsel. Alicia sat with Green, quietly sipping water, forcing calm. Ms. Harper fidgeted in a corner, her attorney looking grim. By late afternoon, the judges returned, delivering an interim decision. They granted Alicia's request that the caretaker order be vacated and the matter assigned to a different judge for a full hearing on the caretaker dispute. Furthermore, they stated that the bench found troubling indications that the original judge may have engaged in prejudicial conduct, and they referred the matter to the State Judicial Conduct Board for further inquiry. Applause broke out from some spectators. The judge's face was drained of color. Alicia felt tears of relief welling up. She'd won a pivotal victory. Her mother's well-being was back in fair consideration. The story spread quickly. Unfair Judge Smirks at a black woman. Regrets it when she calls the Supreme Court, soared as a social media headline. Some might have sensationalized it, but the gist was true. Alicia's determined stance and willingness to escalate proved unstoppable. The local community, especially minority groups, applauded her courage. She became a quiet symbol of pushing back against systemic bias. Meanwhile, Judge Calloway faced deep regret. His smirk had become a symbol of injustice. He released a statement claiming he'd always acted in good faith, but few believed him wholeheartedly. The pending inquiry threatened his career. He realized too late the damage arrogance could do. In the subsequent weeks, a new judge was appointed to Alicia's caretaker case. With fair, open-minded review of her documents, the judge swiftly recognized that Ms. Harper's caretaker role was exploitative and froze her access to the mother's funds, appointing a neutral caretaker. Alicia's mother's well-being improved. Freed from Ms. Harper's manipulations, her mother's finances were secured. Alicia also found an attorney who volunteered pro bono to finalize a guardianship arrangement letting Alicia care for her mother lawfully. The resolution brought Alicia tears of relief. No longer stuck in the quagmire of an unjust judge's rulings, she could protect her mother with dignity. As for Judge Calloway, the Judicial Conduct Board launched a formal investigation, calling witnesses, examining transcripts. Ultimately, a censure was recommended. The final outcome was that he was suspended for a period, and although not fully removed from the bench, his career momentum was effectively derailed. The blow to his reputation was severe. Internally, he recognized he'd triggered his own downfall by letting personal prejudice slip into his professional role, culminating in a humiliating clash with a defendant who refused to be dismissed. Alicia, in the aftermath, found herself the recipient of many heartfelt thanks from others who had faced bias. She felt uneasy in the spotlight, but recognized that her story gave courage to those who feared standing up to authority. She used her platform carefully, emphasizing that not all judges are biased, but that the system must hold them accountable when they are. The Supreme Court clerk Carla occasionally texted Alicia to check in, proud that her small connection had sparked a broader reevaluation of a flawed ruling. One afternoon, Alicia took her mother for a walk in a local park. The older woman had good days and bad days with her dementia. That day, she was lucid enough to express affection for Alicia's perseverance. "You took care of me, baby," she said, eyes shining with pride. "And you showed that judge not to look down on you." Alicia laughed softly, hugging her mother's arm. "Yes, Mama. We made sure he had to pay attention." The warm sun filtered through leafy branches, the hush of wind carrying a sense of peace. Alicia realized her journey was never just about personal pride. It was about protecting her loved one and demonstrating that no one, not even a judge, had the right to belittle or dismiss someone based on prejudice. Some months later, Alicia stood on the courthouse steps again, this time free from her prior anxieties. She had come to finalize the guardianship documentation. As she exited, she spotted the judge, Judge Calloway, descending from a different side door, accompanied by his counsel. Their eyes met briefly. He offered a tentative nod, a ghost of regret in his posture. Alicia gave a polite nod back, feeling no need for confrontation. She sensed his shame. He had paid the price for that mocking smirk, that arrogant approach. Now, the lesson was etched in his mind. No matter how high one sits on the bench, justice demands humility. Alicia walked to her car, stepping with a confidence that soared from deep within. She recalled every moment, from the judge's condescending sneer to the final triumph. The moral, she realized, was that prejudice, whether conscious or subtle, undermines the very essence of justice. When those in power misuse their authority, it's not unstoppable. Those who persist with truth can call upon higher powers, be it appeals courts or even the highest court in the land. And sometimes they'll find that a phone call or an email to the right ally can shake the very foundation of a biased system. She smiled at the thought that no smirk could overshadow her determination to do right by her mother, or overshadow the fundamental principle that justice is for all. Driving home, Alicia paused at a stoplight, glimpsing a reflection of herself in the rearview mirror. She saw resilience, someone who had faced an unfair judge and forced the system to respond. She might not have needed the literal Supreme Court to step in, but even the threat of it was enough to jolt the state system into accountability. Her phone buzzed, another text from Green, congratulating her on the final guardianship order. She typed a quick thank you, remembering how alone she had felt before all these events, how close she came to giving up. But adversity had made her stronger, forging a new confidence in her own voice. Finally, she reached home, greeting her mother with a gentle hug. The living room smelled of a pot of chicken, soup simmering on the stove, a comforting aroma. She helped her mother settle on the couch, flicking on the TV for some nostalgic program. Then, with a moment to herself, Alicia sank into a chair, letting out a long breath of relief. No more court nightmares. No more desire in the quiet. Alicia murmured, "We did it, Mama. We really did." The wind outside rustled the curtains. She reflected on the moral that shaped it all. Never assume your power is absolute. Never assume someone you dismiss can't seek higher recourse. The judge had learned that painfully, and Alicia carried the victory not as a bitter triumph, but as a testament to perseverance, ensuring her mother's rights were upheld. She would carry that moral forward, encouraging others to speak up, never letting prejudice stand unchallenged. And so, the memory of an unfair judge smirking at a black woman remained a cautionary tale for the entire community, one that ended with a powerful reminder that justice, ultimately, is bigger than any single man's arrogance.